So picture this, right? The Roaring Twenties, the Jazz Age, flappers, speakeasies. But for many Black Americans, the reality was, well, it was far from roaring.
Yeah, for sure.
It was a time of just deep racial injustice. We're talking about Jim Crow laws, the ever-present threat of violence.
Absolutely.
And in this climate, this really, really difficult climate, a charismatic leader emerges, right? He promises this radical solution, a return to Africa.
Wow.
On a fleet of ships, get this, owned and operated by Black people.
Okay.
That leader was Marcus Garvey. And this is the story of his audacious dream, the Black Star Line.
It really is an incredible story, one that, well, I think it captures the imagination. It's a story of hope and disillusionment, ambition, and ultimately, tragic failure.
Right.
But it's also a story that I think reveals a pivotal moment in the struggle for Black liberation.
Yeah.
A moment when, well, different visions for freedom really clashed, and the stakes, they couldn't have been higher.
Absolutely. So let's kind of rewind the clock a little bit. Back to the early 1900s.
Okay.
A time when racial tensions were reaching a boiling point.
Yeah.
You're talking about, the aftermath of the horrific East St. Louis riots, where white mobs just attacked Black communities.
Yeah.
Leaving, dozens dead and thousands displaced.
Yeah, and it wasn't just isolated incidents either. The threat of lynching, it was a terrifying reality for Black people across the country.
Right.
Imagine living under that constant fear, knowing that the law offered, well, very little protection, and that your life could be taken, with impunity.
It's unimaginable. It was in this climate of fear and oppression that a young, ambitious Marcus Garvey arrived in Harlem in 1916. Now, people listening might be wondering, well, who was this man? What brought him to America?
Right. Well, Garvey's journey, it began in Jamaica, where he witnessed firsthand the brutal legacy of colonialism. He worked as a printer, a plantation worker. He even led a printer strike at one point.
Oh, yeah.
But it was during his time in London, where he encountered the ideas of Pan-Africanism and Black self-sufficiency that his vision for a global Black liberation movement, it began to take shape.
So he arrives in Harlem, this place just teeming with Black culture and intellectual ferment.
Yeah.
And he finds a community ready for his message of Black pride and empowerment.
Exactly. And, this is all happening while World War I is raging in Europe. Black Americans, they're wrestling with this hypocrisy, right, of fighting for democracy abroad while facing segregation and discrimination at home.
Absolutely.
And Garvey, he tapped into this growing sense of frustration and offered this radical solution: separation from white society and a return to Africa, the ancestral homeland.
It's a powerful message.
It was.
And his message was electrifying. He founded the Universal Negro Improvement Association, the UNIA.
Right.
Which quickly grew into this mass movement with a chapter springing up across the U.S. And even internationally.
Yeah, and he had this captivating stage presence. And his speeches, reportedly they could draw, tens of thousands of people. He called for Black people to reclaim their history, their culture, and their economic power. He urged them to throw off the shackles of mental slavery and embrace their African heritage.
It's important to note, though, that not everyone embraced Garvey's vision.
Yeah.
In fact, one of his most vocal critics was W.E.B. Du Bois.
Right.
A prominent Black intellectual and leader of the NAACP.
Yeah, Du Bois, while he shared Garvey's goal of racial equality, he believed in a very different approach. He advocated for integration into American society, for fighting for civil rights through legal means, and for the advancement of a talented tenth of Black leaders who would, uplift the race.
So we have these two towering figures, both deeply committed to Black liberation, but with fundamentally different visions for how to achieve it. And their clash wasn't just a polite disagreement.
No.
It was a bitter rivalry filled with scathing critiques and personal attacks.
Yeah, one of the most contentious points of disagreement between the two was the idea of Liberia. A nation founded by freed American slaves in West Africa.
Yeah. Right.
Garvey saw Liberia as a potential model for Black self-determination, a place where Black people could govern themselves, free from white interference.
But Du Bois, he was deeply skeptical of Liberia,
He was.
pointing to its history of corruption and its reliance on American patronage.
Mm-hmm.
He argued that simply relocating to Africa, it wouldn't solve the problem of racism, and that black people needed to fight for their rights within the existing system.
Right.
This debate between Garvey and Du Bois, I mean, it highlights a crucial tension that's run throughout the history of black liberation movements.
Right.
The tension between integration and separation, between working within the system to change it and building a separate system altogether.
Absolutely.
And this tension it's at the heart of Garvey's most ambitious and ultimately tragic venture,
Yeah.
the Black Star Line.
Yeah. Now, this is where the story takes a really fascinating turn.
Okay.
Garvey, he envisioned this fleet of ships, owned and operated by black people.
Wow.
A fleet that would facilitate trade between black communities globally and ultimately transport those who wanted to return to Africa. He called it the Black Star Line, a symbol of black empowerment and self-reliance.
It was an incredibly audacious idea.
It was.
And it captured the imagination of millions of black people who are tired of living under Jim Crow and longing for a place where they could be truly free. Yeah. Everyday people, From sharecroppers to teachers to factory workers, they poured their hard-earned savings into buying shares in the Black Star Line. It was more than just an investment.
Yeah.
It was a statement of belief in Garvey's vision.
Yeah.
A tangible expression of their hope for a better future.
And the launch of that first Black Star Line ship, it was a momentous occasion. I mean, there are these incredible photographs of huge crowds gathered at the docks, waving flags and singing songs. Their faces just filled with this mixture of excitement and anticipation. It was a moment of collective triumph, a powerful symbol of black unity and ambition.
But behind this facade of success, the Black Star Line was already facing some serious challenges. The ships they purchased, they were often old.
Right.
And in poor condition, prone to breakdowns and delays.
Yeah.
And the logistics of running a global shipping line, it proved to be far more complex than Garvey had anticipated.
Yeah. And there were also, accusations of mismanagement and corruption, with some claiming that Garvey was more interested in self-enrichment than in actually transporting people to Africa. And as we'll see in the next part of our deep dive, these internal problems, coupled with external pressures from the U.S. government, would ultimately lead to the Black Star Line's demise.
So we'll leave you there for now with a question to ponder. Could this grand vision of black empowerment and self-reliance have ever succeeded, or was it doomed from the start? Stay tuned for part 2 of our deep dive into the life and legacy of Marcus Garvey. Welcome back to our deep dive into the life and legacy of Marcus Garvey.
So when we left off, the Black Star Line, Garvey's ambitious shipping venture, well, it was facing some serious headwinds, even with all the initial excitement and support, right? Yeah, exactly. And remember, we're talking about the 1920s here, a time of, intense social and political upheaval. The Red Scare was in full swing, and any movement that was seen as radical or subversive, especially those led by black people, well, they were met with suspicion and hostility from the government.
And Garvey's message of black nationalism and self-determination, it definitely raised some eyebrows, in Washington.
Yeah.
In fact, he caught the attention of a young J. Edgar Hoover, who was heading the Bureau of Investigation at the time.
Right. The precursor to the FBI.
Exactly.
And Hoover, he saw Garvey as a dangerous threat. Someone who could potentially incite, unrest and upend the racial hierarchy.
Right.
And so he launched this campaign to discredit Garvey, using informants to infiltrate the UNIA and gather evidence of any wrongdoing.
So you have this external pressure from the government.
Right.
But at the same time, Garvey was facing challenges from within the black community itself.
Oh, absolutely. Not everyone agreed with Garvey's separatist approach. Many black leaders, like W.E.B. Du Bois, they believe that integration and fighting for civil rights within the existing system, that was a more effective path to equality.
And this clash between Garvey and Du Bois, it intensified as the Black Star Line, it began to kind of to unravel.
Yeah, I mean the ships were breaking down. The finances were in disarray, and accusations of fraud they were swirling around. And Garvey's critics, including Dubois, I mean they seized on these problems as proof that his grandiose vision it was unrealistic and ultimately harmful.
And then Garvey does something that, well, I think it shocked a lot of his supporters. He makes this really controversial decision. He reaches out to the Ku Klux Klan.
Yeah, this was a stunning turn of events. Here you have the champion of Black nationalism, a man who called for Black people to unite and separate from white society.
Right.
And he's meeting with the most notorious white supremacist organization in the country.
It seemed like a complete contradiction.
It did.
So what was Garvey thinking?
Well, it was a complex and some would argue, misguided calculation on his part. He saw the Klan as a powerful force in the South, where he was trying to build support for the UNIA, and he believed that by aligning himself with the Klan, he could protect his Southern chapters from violence and intimidation.
It's almost like he was trying to to play one enemy off against the other.
Exactly. He saw both, the federal government and white supremacist groups like the Klan as threats to his movement.
Right.
And he thought that by making a deal with the Klan, he could at least, neutralize one of those threats.
But it backfired. I mean, didn't it? Spectacularly.
It really did. The news of Garvey's meeting with the Klan, it caused a huge uproar.
Yeah.
Many of his supporters, they felt betrayed. They saw it as a sign that he was, willing to compromise his principles for political expediency.
Right.
And his critics, like Dubois, I mean, they used it to further discredit him, portraying him as an erratic and unreliable leader.
So we have the Black Star Line. It's collapsing. Internal divisions within the UNIA, and now this disastrous alliance with the Klan. I mean, it's a recipe for disaster.
Yeah. It really was, and that's exactly what happened. The Justice Department, led by a relentless J. Edgar Hoover. I mean, they saw an opportunity to finally take Garvey down, and they charged him with mail fraud, stemming from the sale of Black Star Line stock.
And this trial, I mean, it became a defining moment in Garvey's life, a moment where his strengths, his charisma and his powerful oratory skills, well, they ultimately worked against him.
That's an interesting point. Garvey, I mean, always a showman. He decided to represent himself in court. He believed that his eloquence, it would sway the jury, but instead, his long rambling speeches, they alienated the judge and jury. He came across as arrogant and out of touch, and he failed to mount a coherent legal defense.
It was a tragic downfall for a man who had once commanded such a large and devoted following.
It was, Garvey, he was found guilty and sentenced to 5 years in prison.
Wow.
And although, he maintained his innocence and continued to inspire his followers, his movement, it had been dealt a devastating blow.
So here we are, right? Marcus Garvey, imprisoned for mail fraud. His movement, I mean, it seems like it's in shambles.
Yeah.
The Black Star Line, well, it's a fading memory. And it'd be, I think it'd be easy to write him off, right, as a failure. A man whose dreams, well, they outstripped his abilities.
Yeah, but that's not the whole story, is it?
Yeah.
I mean, while Garvey's personal and political fortunes may have faltered, the ideas that he unleashed, I mean, they continue to reverberate long after his imprisonment and eventual deportation back to Jamaica in 1927.
Yeah, it's like trying to contain a fire, right? You might stamp out the flames in one spot, but the embers, they can smolder and they can reignite elsewhere.
Right.
So how did Garvey's vision continue to spark change even after his downfall?
Well, let's think about the sheer scale of his movement, right? I mean, at its peak, the UNIA, it had, I mean, millions of members worldwide.
Wow.
Garvey had tapped into this deep well of longing for Black empowerment and self-determination.
Yeah.
And those aspirations, well, they didn't just vanish overnight.
And what about, I mean, what about the Black Star Line itself? Sure, it was a financial and logistical disaster, but didn't it also achieve, kind of a kind of symbolic victory?
Oh, absolutely. The very name Black Star, it became this powerful emblem of Black pride and aspiration. It appeared on flags, in song lyrics, in the names of businesses and organizations. It represented this audacious dream of Black economic independence and the yearning for a homeland, free from white oppression.
So even though the ships themselves, they may have faltered, the idea that they embodied, it continued to sail on.
Precisely. And this brings us to the broader question of Garvey's legacy.
Yeah.
How do we reconcile the man's flaws and failures with the undeniable impact of his vision?
Yeah, it's a complex question, and one that I think historians they continue to debate.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
On the one hand, you have the tangible damage, the financial losses suffered by those who invested in the Black Star Line.
Yeah.
The internal conflicts that fractured the UNIA, the accusations of corruption that really tarnished Garvey's reputation. But on the other hand, you have the intangible but arguably more profound impact of his ideas. Garvey's message of Black pride, self-reliance, and unity, it resonated deeply, particularly among working class Black people who felt excluded from the more elite circles of the NAACP.
Right.
He gave voice to their frustrations, their anger. And their yearning for a world where they would be treated with dignity and respect.
And importantly, his emphasis on connecting the struggles of Black people in America to those in the Caribbean and Africa. Well, it helped lay the groundwork for future Pan-African movements.
It's almost like he planted seeds that would blossom decades later in the Black Power movement, the Civil Rights movement, and in the rise of Black consciousness movements globally.
Exactly. I mean, you can draw a direct line from Garvey's speeches on the streets of Harlem to the lyrics of Bob Marley, who famously echoed, Garvey's call to emancipate yourselves from mental slavery.
And that's a powerful testament to the enduring legacy of Garvey's message.
Yeah.
It transcended the failures of the Black Star Line and the controversies that surrounded his leadership.
Right.
Ultimately, Garvey's story, it's a reminder that social movements, they're often, messy, they're complex, and they're full of contradictions.
Yeah.
Leaders are flawed. Visions can be, imperfect, and even the grandest dreams, well, they can stumble.
Right.
But the impact of ideas, especially those that tap into deep yearnings for justice and equality, they can outlive those setbacks and continue to inspire future generations.
Absolutely.
It's a story that I think it challenges us to think critically about the nature of leadership, the complexities of social movements, and the enduring power of hope and aspiration, even in the face of adversity.
Yeah, I agree.
If you're looking to delve deeper into this fascinating and controversial figure, Colin Grant's biography, Negro with a Hat, well, it's an excellent starting point.
And if you enjoyed this deep dive into the life and legacy of Marcus Garvey, be sure to subscribe to the deep dive for more thought-provoking journeys into history, culture, and ideas. We'll continue to bring you insightful analysis, surprising details, and engaging storytelling to keep you informed and inspired. Thanks for listening.